told you that we're going to be doing some in-depth interviews with some people every now and then in the Buffalo area. And I figured, who better to start with? A good friend of mine, good friend of the Doug Ruffin Show, a gentleman who's been out here in the Buffalo area for quite a while, doing some big things. And we're going to talk to him about some of the things he's done over the years. None other than the one and only Ted Kirkland, the man, the myth, the legend. How you doing there, Ted?
I'm doing well, brother Ruffin, and you haven't lost your touch, so it's easy for you to get back into television. You know, you're made for TV.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Gee, thanks. I know you've been out there doing some things in the television business, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. I'm going to talk about your history and background in the city of Buffalo. Were you originally from Buffalo, New York?
No, when people say originally, you know, they talk in terms of birthplace. You know, I was born in a little town called Camden, South Carolina. Came here young, went to school here, we lived out in South Buffalo for a while. We left the inner city, what we call the inner city now. You started off living on Pratt Street, we lived on Spring Street. We moved to South Buffalo back in 1944, the Irish neighborhood, where my parents bought their first house on a street called O'Connor, which now, interestingly, that whole little area there now has been redeveloped, and they call it Hickory Woods. You've probably heard of that word. The people are complaining about the pollution. Well, you know, the pollution was there, and we were there. We just ate it, you know, and we lived with it. But because back in those days, pollution was not an issue in America. You know, people lived with it. But it was not a political issue, it was not a health issue necessarily. So people didn't know any better, and it was there. Left there and went in the military, went in the Air Force in 1952, way before your day. It's 51 years ago now, by the way. Went in the Air Force with my best buddy and I enlisted, Eddie Presley, and the two of us joined Air Force together. And, you know, interestingly, we met a guy called Grant Hainsworth. I don't know if you remember Grant.
Yes, actually, my mother worked for Grant.
Well, Grant, Eddie, and I, we were all in basic training together. Sampson Air Force Base, up in Geneva, New York. That's when I first met Grant. Grant was smart, intellectually smart. He wasn't like us. You know, we were more street smart and everything else, but we didn't have that kind of brain power that Grant had. So Grant went into being a clerk, and Eddie went into being a mechanic in the Air Force, and I ended up in the Air Police.
When you got to Buffalo, you told me in the year back in the day, a lot of you and as well as a lot of people, you had different occupations. What kind of occupations did you have?
Man, I've worked some everywhere. That wasn't unusual, I don't think, for people back during those days. You know, my parents had ended up in the restaurant business. I used to wash dishes. Number one, I used to deliver papers. I used to sell papers on the corner. I used to sell papers on the corner of McKinley Parkway and Abbott Road, way deep out there in the Irish neighborhood. That's when papers were 3 cents a piece. And somebody would come along in a car, and I'm standing on the corner. This would be early in the morning, and someone would come by, people would come by and give you a nickel, and you would hope they wouldn't ask for the 2 cent change. That was your tip, you know, if they just give you the nickel and keep going at 5 cents. So then I ended up, after that, I got to be a hopper. I don't know if you know what a hopper is.
I would imagine that a hopper is something like a paper boy or something like that.
Yeah, but you worked on the truck. You know, you would hop. They call it hopper because you jump out the truck and run the papers into the stores and hop back on the truck and go to the next store or that kind of a thing. So I got to be a hopper. Eddie Presley was the hopper first, and I ended up being a hopper, and he went to Bethlehem Steel, I guess. I left there. I didn't leave there, but I had a car washing job I do on Saturdays at this meat delivery business, and they had several trucks that I would go in there on Saturdays and wash those trucks. I left there and I started working in a rag factory, baling rags, and I was making about $25, $30 a week, I guess, which at that time wasn't too bad, but it wasn't no real money. And they sort of liked me at the job because I worked. And it was from there that I went in the Air Force. When I came out of the Air Force, I think one of my first jobs, I went to Chevy. And I ended up down in the pit, I call it, shoveling grit. You had to put a mask on or whatever. And about the first hour, I was ready to quit the job, but I couldn't. The foreman didn't show up, so I stayed. Same thing with the second day. And the third day, the foreman did show up while I was working, and I quit.
I have a question. When you mentioned the pit, is that the pit where when you go down there, the floor of the pit is hot?
Well, it's hot only because the way I'm at, it's hot only because what's happening is that people above is grinding machines or tools, and it's the grit from the tools that are falling down and piling up. So what I had to do was shovel that stuff. Okay, and that was hot. Basically it was warm down there. So that was where. And I quit after 3 days.
I asked that question because my father also worked at Bethlehem Steel, and him and some of his friends used to go down there, and they would be jumping up and down trying to get out of there.
And I left there and went to Bethlehem. I went to Republic Steel. No, I went to Westinghouse. Worked one night at Westinghouse. Good job. Had a good job there, operating a machine. I did it one night, and got home that night. And mind you, I lived in South Buffalo, and Westinghouse out there by the airport. Got home that night, and Republic Steel had called that afternoon and said for me to come in the next day if I wanted to work. So and Republic was right around the corner from where I lived. So then I went around the corner and started working at Republic, and I stayed there about 6 months. And then I went to another place called American Car Foundry, which was over on Clinton and Babcock at that time. And I worked there until they closed up. Left there and I went to Twin Coach, which is out there by the airport where they made airplane wings and that kind of stuff. Stayed there until I got laid off. And I jumped to a few other little jobs in between. At Bethlehem Steel, I worked for 11 days and got laid off. They only hired a bunch of people for a short period of time. So, and when it got to around 1961, around let me back up because one of the first jobs I wanted to get into the state police.
What was it that inspired you to become a police officer?
Well, I think what inspired me to become a police officer was the fact that I was put into the air police and the military, because I really hated it from the beginning because of the reputation police officers had in our community. And I didn't want to be no police officer. But once, after 4 years in the military, and finding out that it wasn't a bad a position to have, when I got out, I wanted to be a state trooper. And I went to and you had to go in those days, you had to go to the state police barracks. And the closest one was out on Route 5, just out there by Hamburg, someplace. So I went out there, to get an application. And as I walked in, this white trooper, without even looking up, and apparently he must have saw me coming in the door, he says, "What can I do for you?" And I says, "Well, I want an application for state police." I says, so then he said, "Well, you're not qualified." And so I said, "What's the qualifications?" He says, "You didn't hear me." I said, "You're not qualified." So I left. And at the time, there were no black troopers in New York State. To give you an example of the climate at that time, they had no black troopers. So I left. 2 years later, I did get an opportunity to take the test. And as we were taking the test, we meaning, everyone, there were troopers walking around, and they would stop at every black person that was in that room, pick up their paper and put a mark on it. So then after it was all over with, a group of us blacks gathered outside, and one guy, older fellow, he says, "Well, you know what that means." Then he came by and he put down a number 2 on your paper, it means that you're black and that you're not going to get hired. And sure enough, you know, that was a sort of a code, you know, that they used to keep from hiring people. So, you know, I lost out on that one. And later on, I did take the Buffalo Police exam, as well as New York City Police Department, as well as the Washington, D.C. Police Department exam, and also the New York State Toll Collectors exam, which was a good job in those days. And I'm talking about 1960, 61. So then the New York City notified me I had passed. They wanted me to come down for psychological. I went down for the psychological. In the interim, Washington, D.C. notified me I had passed. The toll collectors notified me that I had passed. And I was really waiting for Buffalo because I didn't want to have to move or anything at that point in my life. Because I'd gotten married by this time and the whole nine. Yeah, I had a couple kids. So anyway, Buffalo finally did call, and so I ended up accepting the position in the Buffalo Police Department. This was September 10th, 1962. Well, that was the day I was sworn in into the police department with another black named, Arthur Taggart. Art Taggart was younger than me, and he did end up in the state police. I think he stayed with Buffalo about a year and a half, and then by this time, Rockefeller had become governor of New York. He opened up the state police. The Democrat that was governor prior to him ran a segregated police force. So he took Rockefeller to come in, and he opened up the state police. He also opened up the university system. At that time, it was the University of Buffalo. You could count the blacks on your one hand. He made it into a university system, which was able to bring in more blacks. So, you know, many times we hear people talk about being a Democrat, they're going to die a Democrat. Was fine, you know, you can die all you want. It doesn't make any difference to me. But if one was to sit down and really begin to analyze, if you wanted to analyze which party has actually done the most for African Americans, it's going to be the Republican Party. And I'm not promoting it. I'm just merely making a factual statement that a lot of blacks are not aware of. You know, many say, well, the Democrats are for poor people. Yes, maybe they are, if that's where you want to feel about it, keeping you poor and keeping you on the plantation, because they've done a fantastic job of that.
In addition to being a police officer, you know, you sound like you know what I'm getting ready to ask you. But what was it that inspired you to get into the political realm? And also, what offices did you run for?
Because of my activities with the police and because of our accomplishments, in 1973, a group of citizens in the city of Buffalo honored me by giving me a testimonial dinner at the Statler Hilton, in which more than 500 people showed up. That was interpreted by some people to mean that I could win a seat. I didn't know the first thing about politics, to be honest with you. Arthur Eve came and tried to convince me, and I put it off, and then he had some other folks come. And finally I said, okay, and I ran the first time. I ran for Fillmore District Council seat in 73. Using some of the money I had obtained from the testimonial dinner, Eve had promised that his people would help me win this seat. I didn't know, again, let me just say, I didn't know the first thing about it. There was no one to tell me. So I was listening to him and his people, and that he would make sure I got the rest of the money I needed to win, that I could win this seat in the Fillmore District. So I said, okay, well, what the heck. So I ran, and I was beat. Richard Okonewski beat me, and I had the Liberal Party endorsement, and I was, of course, lost again in the general election. And I remember going to Jim Bell, and because Jim Bell was one of the key supporters, and he was considered Art Eve's godfather. And I went to him and I said, you know, I'm real disappointed and because I thought I was going to do something. And I never will forget, you know, what he said to me, you know, he said, you know, you weren't really supposed to win. You were just out there to help bring the black votes out for Wilbur. Now, this is the first time that Wilbur Trammell had ran for mayor, which was 73. And I said, what? He says, that's the only reason you're out there. You weren't out there to win no election. That's why we put you out there, just to draw it. Well, I was hurt. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'd spent my money and da-da-da-da. So that was how I first got started in running for a political office. The second time I ran, and it wasn't for a political office per se, I ran for president of NAACP. I had served on the board of directors of NAACP for a number of years. And what inspired me to run for president of the local branch was that at the time, it was 1978, I had been appointed to the parole board by this time. And I was up in Auburn, New York one night, nothing to do, when I had bought a local newspaper. And I had to stay over that night because I had to go back into Auburn State Prison the next day and conduct parole hearings. And I looked over this newspaper, and I noticed in the paper it had in there that there was an NAACP meeting that night at a local church. And I said, gee, that gives me something to do. I had to sit around this motel room looking at TV. So I found my way there. And there were 6 people at that meeting. And I walked in, they were talking, they were discussing how they could increase their membership in NAACP. And they were kicking this thing around. And finally I raised my hand, you know, and I said, you know, introduced myself, and I said, you know, listening to you, you know, listening to you discuss how to increase your membership in NAACP. I said, I think that one of the things that we miss many times is the people that need us the most. I said, so even right here, I don't care which county you may go into, you're going to find a large number of poor people, African Americans in particular, you know, who are fighting in the welfare system and the police department and these kind of things. If you come to their aid and assistance, you know, I'm pretty sure, you know, you can increase your membership. Well, the 6 people that were there was evenly divided. It was 3 whites and 3 blacks, all NAACP people. Well, after I made this statement, this lady got up, nice, elderly, white woman, looked like the grandmother type, looked like she wouldn't hurt a fly, looked like, you know, she was sort of angelic looking, if you want to put it that way. And she said, but we don't want those kinds of people in our NAACP. And I was floored. Here I was, an executive member of the Buffalo branch, and I'm saying, and the thing that got to me was, are we that way in Buffalo? And so after a while, I was able to sneak out of that meeting. You know, I was so, and not one of those blacks stood up to defend me or to say, yes, we do, we do want, you know, all kinds of people in our organization. Not one of them. And I left out of there, and and as I went to these meetings in Buffalo, I found out that there was very little difference, and that we didn't have poor people necessarily that we were representing. And so I ran against Dan Acker, and it was the most interesting race I ever had in my life. And the final analysis, he beat me 2-1. But I never knew there were so many white people that were members of the NAACP in Buffalo. And I saw people coming in, they had rented buses for folks, senior citizens, put them on buses coming in. Leroy Cole would say to me later, who was executive director of the Urban League here, president of Urban League, he would say to me later that his mother was on the phone calling all the old folks and saying, we cannot let that radical Kirkland win, you know, as president. And that was the image that they put out there on me, and so therefore, of course, I lost that. The next time I ran for office, again, I was still on the parole board. I ran against Tony Masiello for state senate. What was most interesting about that race was that up to that point, I had supported every black, basically, that ever ran for office, especially for mayor, starting with Lane, Trammell, and Artie in 77, and later on it'd be George Arthur in 85. This is 84, I should say, when I ran against Tony. And I could never get Tony in a debate. Blacks would take Tony and sneak him through the community and have meetings with him. But I never got not the support of none of our leadership in the black community. Not one black elected official could support me or would support me. Clergymen were staying away from me, basically, even though they had a little meeting and they said they did support me. They weren't really. My pastor at that time wouldn't let me speak to the congregation. He was maybe say owned, controlled by the Democratic Party also. So, you know, that race, probably more so than any other race, enlightened me of just what was going on politically in our community and how controlled our folks were, you know, in terms of those who are in political positions. They only have a job, and I can say that even to this day. They have a job. And oftentimes the decisions that they make, even to this day, are detrimental to the masses of our folks. That's why when you see the more we seem to get, the worse our conditions become in our communities. The next time I ran for office, of course, was I was off the parole board then. I ran, and I ran then, I think it wasn't because I was pursuing it, but I remember T.C. Smith, you know, who was associated with WUFO for a long time, WUFO Radio, coming to me with a group of people because I had been still active out there and saying to me, we want you to run. It's not going to cost you a penny. We will raise the money. I said, but I can't win. And they said, well, we think you can win. Well, at that time, I knew a little better. I really didn't think I could win. They said, all we want is for you to get out there and work hard and try and win, you know, and then we think you can win. Okay. I agreed to do it. So I ran for county legislature against Bill Robinson, the old man, we call him. Nice old guy. I liked Bill. And the system put in Ed Herndon, or our evening put in Ed Herndon, to help pull the votes. See, let me just back up a minute. In politics, there's things I learned as I went along, and what many people don't understand oftentimes is when you're running against an incumbent, one who's been in office, some of the first things you need to do if you're going to run against is you do your homework, and that is you do your research and find out what percentage of the registered voters in that district is actually voting for that candidate. Well, that's one of the things we did, and we found that only 30-something odd percent was voting for him, which meant 60-something odd percent was not voting for him. You follow what I'm saying? For whatever reason. So that means now if you run against this guy, you have a chance of pulling that 60-something percent or a great portion of it and winning. But now, if they want to stop you, what they do is they put some more candidates in there so that you split that 60-something percent. This candidate historically is pulling 30, let's say 37%. He's pulling 37% all the time, year after year. Okay, so that means 63% of the registered voters in that district are not voting for him or whatever. Now, you go out there as a lone candidate, just one candidate, you're shooting for that 63%. Now, if the parties and the powers that be stick another person in, that means two of you are shooting for the 63%. Well, when Ed Herndon was put in, they did another survey and they found that I could still win. Then they got Minnie Gillette and put Minnie Gillette in. Then everything changed. Now, that meant three of us are running and trying to get that 63% because his 33% is stable. Final analysis, of course, Bill Robinson won again. One of the interesting things during that period, though, was I had put an application in for a teaching position at Erie Community College. And during the campaign, I got a phone call from the college, and the person said, are you still interested in teaching here at Erie Community College? I said, yes. They said, well, the job is yours, but you'll have to get out of the race. And that's how political that college. I said, well, I'm not going to get out of the race. I always, all my life, hated for people to give me a choice, an ultimatum, you know, that you better do X, Y, and Z. You know, that's not the way to come at me. So I wouldn't get out. And of course, I didn't, you know, get that job. So the final analysis, Bill Robinson, he won. I came in second. Minnie came in third. Ed Herndon came in a distant last. So that's the last time I ran for political office. Not looking for any more political positions. Know quite a bit about it at this point in time. It's not our salvation, like some of us used to think, I guess. We have not been able to elect a mayor in Buffalo, not because of white people, because of black people. We have never, I remember when Ambrose Lane ran, there were only 2 blacks elected officials supporting Ambrose, and that was Roger Blackwell and Art Eve, at least, that's what they said. And so then when Wilbur Trammell ran, it's the same kind of breakdown. When Art Eve ran, the same kind of breakdown. And that's because most of the blacks were always party people. They would follow the dictates of the party, and only race, color was only used for them to get elected and get some of the things they want. And once they're elected, it's out the window. So that when George Arthur ran for mayor in '85, Art Eve, and even though he was endorsed by the party, Art Eve aligned himself with a group of whites, and they selected a guy called Constantino to be their candidate on the Liberal Party line. And so it's been this year after each time. It's been this, and the main reason, and you learn this later on, is that these people are controlled. They're totally controlled, and that's why our school systems are so bad off. That's why we don't really get anything accomplished in our communities. They don't own themselves. They have not had the character. They do not have the character, fortitude, or the strength to be able to control themselves and really to represent our folk.
Action, lights, one, look out, civil rights, whiplash, popo, grand killers, killing kids, Christ, look out!
Sometime back in the 1970s, you had applied for a civil service position. It was the director of security for the Buffalo Board of Education. What was could you take us back to the situation surrounding that?
At that time, I was probably the most active person with young folks. Young people trusted me. I became, for the first time in history in this city, East High graduates in 1971 selected me, a police officer, patrolman, as their commencement speaker, and to show you the respect, that they had for me. So no one could ever remember a police officer being called to be a commencement speaker. So the relationship that I had with young people far exceeded that of anybody else. So when the exam came up for director of security, which security means the Board of Education, where they had people in, the schools and what have you, I remember George Arthur calling me and saying, look, I got information that no blacks have applied for this civil service test, to take this test. You have been running around yelling and screaming about opening positions up for black people, blah, 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 and the races, and yet, why don't you apply? I said, well, I don't really want the job, to be honest with you. And so anyway, I talked with him, and I said, I'll tell you what, if I can't get Frank Hughes to apply, and that's just what I said, I will then apply for it. So anyway, Frank didn't want it, and so I went and I signed up for it to take the tests and the job. And I'll never forget, it was on a Saturday we went to take the civil service test, and there were about 25 white men from all throughout the county, throughout the city. And here I was a patrolman, and I'm taking it, we had some assistant chiefs, we had captains, we had and lieutenants, and those kind of people. And I don't know if you've ever taken a civil service exam, but you have a person in the room who tells you when to start and when to stop, because they only give you so much time. So when the guy said, okay, you can begin, I put my head down, and this is the truth. And I began to think, and I was thinking about what a friend of mine had said to me, which was Bob Lamb out of Atlanta. He says, there's nothing difficult about taking those tests. He said, the one thing black folks miss and they don't understand, and that is who makes the test. You have to think in terms of who made the test. White men made the test. So white men looking for an answer that's pleasing to white men. Don't have to be the right answer. It's just the answer that they want. It's the answer that they're looking for. Well, before I started taking the test, I held my head down, I closed my eyes, and I tried to erase as much of my blackness at that point as I possibly could, and I wanted to think as white as I could. So I came out number one. So I guess maybe I was thinking whiter than anybody else in that room at that particular time. I don't know. But anyway, I came out number one. On the final analysis, came out number one on the test. And I remember walking down, feeling good about it, because everybody, thought that was a great thing, man, because at the time they were running around here talking about black folks couldn't pass civil service tests and couldn't come out number one. And I guess the city administration and others, the school officials, wished anyone could have passed that test number one other than me. At any rate, I remember walking down the street, and this was before they made their selection. There was only 3 people passed the test, by the way. An official of the NAACP, I remember stopping me in the street, and he said to me, "You're not going to get that job." And I said, "What do you mean I'm not going to get the job?" He said, "I'm number one on the list." He said, "Because there's a fear that because of your closeness with kids, you may stop them from doing some of the things that they're doing that helps the city bring monies into this city." And I was shocked that he knew this. I had seen it by way of the Roving Leader Gang program. That what was happening in Buffalo was perpetuating devious behavior among our young folks in order for them to write a grant and send down to Albany. I mean, not Albany, but D.C. for money. And that exists even to this day. There's nobody putting any concerted effort into trying to stop crime in our community. Crime is profitable to certain people. They can write grants and they bring monies in because of crime. A lot of black folks are living off of the crime problem in this city right now. Some of your community-based organizations would dry out and disappear if it wasn't for the crime problem. So you don't have that concerted effort, and it started back years back then. But anyway, so I didn't. The board did not vote for me to have that job. The only one on the board who voted for me was Dr. Blackman. Florence Barr didn't vote for me. She was a board member, and she voted for the white man. So at any rate, this thing went back and forth for a couple years, and I did sue. And we had a court case here, and by the time the case came to court, I was on the parole board, and they brought a judge in from downstate. They didn't use any of the federal judges in this area. And I remember him saying after the trial, after we testified and everything, he said, I find the school system guilty, discrimination, whatever. And I'm going to award you, Mr. Kirkland, give you a little bit of money, but I'm not going to give you the job because you have a better job now. So the principle of the thing, because of the principle of the thing, I said to the judge, "But Judge, don't you think I should decide whether I want that job or not?" He said, "Oh, no, you're not going to get the job." He was Irish. Everybody in that room, I think, was Irish with me. School system was controlled by the Irish in Buffalo at that point, too. So I said, "Okay, Judge." And when he said a little bit of money, that's just what he meant, too. He gave me $900 some. Gave my lawyers, I think it was $16,000. He awarded the lawyers $16,000 for representing me. And they felt guilty, and they gave me $5,000 of their money. So I came out of there with about $5,000 and some change. And I wrote a letter accusing the law firm of not working as hard as they should have worked for me. So that was the story behind that.
Ted, throughout the years, you've been a police officer, you've ran for office, but you've also, even to this day, you've dabbled in the media. Now, I know you've had television shows and radio shows. Let's talk about your television show, Kirkland and Company. How did that come about?
How that began is WKBW put together the advisory board in which I was a member of it, along with Dan Acker, Leroy Coles, John Smith, Lionel Davis, and a number of other people, to advise them on how to relate to the African American community. And we'd have these meetings, man, and they would feed us steaks, and I mean, we were eating the top shelf stuff and what have you, drinking the good stuff. And I guess I emerged in the meeting as one of probably the most active and one of the most critical members of the group. And so one day I received a telephone call in my home, and the station manager said, you know, how would you like to host a TV show for us? And I thought he was joking. I said, I don't have the slightest idea how to go about doing a TV show. I've never been in it. Well, we think you're a natural, so we'd like for you to try it out, you know, that kind of stuff. You just come down and do one show for us, whatever. So after a period of time, when I talked with Lionel Davis, I think, and whatever, and I told him I didn't want to look like I was selling out anything to him, you know, but here's what was offered to me. They said, go for it. So I went down, I did the one show, and I never forget the first show I did was dealing with the media and its relationship with the black community and so forth and so on. And then after that, management said, I want you to do 2 more. So I did 1 more after that, and after that they said, how would you like to do 10? So after I'd done about 4, they said, how about staying with us? You know, we think you're a natural, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, now I've gotten a little comfortable. I'm picking my own people. I'm doing everything myself. And that was the beginning of it. I lost out on a great opportunity there. If one wanted to look at it, I guess I could have went places. I guess in TV, they had put together one night a meeting with a lot of rich white men, and they wanted to know what did I want to do with that show. Where did I want to go? And I was such a neophyte and so naive, you know, that I really didn't know what to say. And so I said something like, I want to be able to help the black community and relate to the community, that kind of stuff, which, as you well know, high finances don't give a hoot about that kind of stuff. So I missed a great opportunity, maybe of going national or whatever the case may be, but I always figured, you know, God knew best what he wanted to do with me, and that's where I've been. Well, the radio show came almost the same way. Colin was a little different. The way I got on the radio show, back, I think around '86, T.C. Smith had got me originally to do, he had this idea, because the gospel hour used to be basically all gospel. And in the interim, we had gotten to be friends, and he had this idea, I think you could do it, turn this thing into a talk show. So he had me come down. He used to broadcast at that time, I think it was 1490. And so I started doing the talk show. Well, in the interim, I ended up getting a job in New York City at Hunter College, where I had to teach on Saturday, so I had to give that up. And when I gave it up, he had to look around for some others, and so, you know. But anyway, later on, and I ended up started writing a little bit, and then I had a meeting with Al Neeser, and I said to her, you know, I think I can help your paper. The one thing that you don't have is an investigative reporter who, you know, who can go out and look at some things. Now, mind you, I've never been an investigative reporter in my life, but I figured I could do that. And so I started writing a column. And so then in '93, I remember TC calling me up, and he said, look, how'd you like to have a radio show during the week? You know, so I couldn't do it on Saturdays anymore. And Lenore, a lady named Lenore, was here then, was the station manager. And we think you can help the community, blah, 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 always that. But anyway, so that's how I got started with the radio again. Radio, television, those sort of like people came to me and asked me, you know, to do it. The only jobs I think that I ever had were people would come and actually solicit me for a job, you know. Oh, I shouldn't say that, but the 2 that I actually accepted.
As I said earlier in the interview, it's been a while since the last time we were here on camera, and that was back in early 1999, and a lot's changed since then, politically, I should say. We were in the midst of at the time, we were in the midst of having a black majority on the Buffalo Common Council, and now here we sit today. 9/11 has passed, one of the biggest tragedies in our country's history. Also, but within our city's history, some major changes have taken place. There's been a downsizing of the Common Council, which is, interestingly enough, targeted many of the minority members on the Common Council, as well as now the city's going through some financial problems, and we have a control board. What are your views on the council downsizing and the control board in particular?
Well, let me say, I was one of the supporters of downsizing. You know the truth about it. I'm a physical conservative, meaning I don't like to waste dollars. Okay, it's just that clear, and we're talking about big business. Let's be realistic here. We were decreasing police services. I should say decreasing policemen. We were decreasing firemen. We were decreasing teachers, the whole 9 yards. And yet we were trying to maintain a common council that was structured for a city of 500,000 people, when the city's population had reduced down to less than 300,000. So we didn't need a 14 or 13-member common council. Furthermore, when you mention the fact about the black majority, I wrote an article back, I think it was shortly after they were elected. Maybe it was 2000 when we got that black majority. And the title of that article was "When the Minority Becomes the Majority." I had doubts even then whether the caliber of people that we had selected could actually be a majority and mentally. And unfortunately, my belief came true. There was nothing that those people accomplished in 2 years that helped this community. Not one cotton-picking thing. They could not work as a majority. See, one of our biggest problems, and let me just make that very clear, is psychological. If you have conditioned yourself all your life to complain, and I go back to the time when Jimmy Griffin was in as mayor, and George Arthur, Dave Collins, Jimmy Pitts, and a bunch of them were on the council. And I worked up in City Hall for about 7 months, and I thought it was the worst job I ever had in my life. And one of the things I found out up there, and I remember every time Jimmy Griffin would come out with something, they would oppose it. And I remember asking George Arthur one day, what would you, I mean, you guys keep opposing whatever Griffin comes out, but you don't never put anything in its place. And I never will forget the response was, "We don't have to." Well, that's not the way I trained myself. If I say to you, we're going to take a trip someplace, and you tell me you think this is the best route to go, and I say, no, it isn't, then I'm supposed to replace that with something. That's the way we ran the Afro-American Police Association that way. We had a policy, put a policy through, that if you disagree with what another member suggests, and you're coming up with a new, that means you're going to come up with a better one. That cuts out a whole lot of the foolishness. I said all that to say this, that over the years, what they've done is condition themselves to be anti. They condition themselves to think as a minority. They condition themselves to think not as a person promoting a policy, but just being opposed to whatever came down. So you train yourself to be able to be against everything, but you're not training yourself to be the boss and proposing something. And when you look around this city, you're going to have to ask those questions at times, that many of these individuals cannot make plans. I have yet to see plans made. And I'm not saying everybody's that way. The system has been such that it has allowed us to select and put those kinds of people in office. We have some bright blacks in this town, but they can't win no election. You understand what I'm saying? They cannot win an election. So in the 2 years that you had these individuals, hey, you can say we had a black majority. That's the best you could say. Everything remained the same or got worse. There was no plan. I said on my radio show a number of times, you asked, what is the plan of the black majority? What is your plan about how we're going to save this city? We're in financial trouble. Come up with an idea. They couldn't come up with an idea. Most of them are bought and paid for by city unions, that they couldn't even come up and propose a non-residency tax. or propose a commuter tax. Why? Because the unions control them already. They can't offend the unions. Many blacks take the position, well, so what? I'd rather see a black in there than a white. I've even had people say to me, I'd rather for a black cop to beat me than a white cop. And I'm saying that sounds sick to me. We have to get away from that type of thought. We're going to be in this world for a long time, and we're going to have to be competitive. And we're going to have to look out for cities like this. Black elected officials are inheriting poor cities or whatever. And there are things they should be doing, and they're not doing those things. And if, in fact, the other side of town owns them, then they're not doing us any cotton picking good. And there's no sense in us keeping a hold of them. Let's change them for somebody else. So I said all that to say that I was one in favor of downsizing of the council. And I gave good reasons for it. I thought the control board was necessary because they're doing some things. If you look in Business First this week, I believe, and we're taping this today, which is, what is it, the 15th of October. And I think Business Week did a survey on a number of cities. And they found that Buffalo has a bloated number of people working for the city. In other words, we have too many people working for the city compared with other cities. But our 15 member councils never come, our majority never came up with anything. So I think it's going to take the control board to put this city back on track because the politicians that you have in now are basically controlled by unions. They're not going to do it. I would not be surprised if the control board doesn't force this city to have a commuter tax. It did Yonkers. That's what they did in Yonkers. They forced Yonkers to have a commuter tax where they had to make some of the people who live in suburbia contribute to the city. That's where the money's going. But you can't get these people that you've elected to do that. Let me make another point in reference to the black majority you talked about. We must also remember that it's the at-large members that were being eliminated. At-large members were not put in office just by us blacks. They were put in office by everybody in Buffalo. You follow what I'm saying? They weren't district council persons. I was also, when I came out years ago, I think it was 1995, I did a piece and I said at that time, it was right after George Arthur had resigned or retired from being council president, and it was before Jimmy Pitts had said he was going to pursue it. I had said then it was a great opportunity for the mayor to get rid of that position because we could save $250,000, by having the council person select a member of the council to be their council president, because the council president wasn't really beholden to the masses of people anyway. The only thing he was supposed to do was supposed to preside over meetings and appoint committee persons. So if we're going to be, and I'm planning on being a part of a city, you have to be able to be a working part of that city and understand how the city functions, and not how you think it should function, but the way it actually functions. And we're going to have to be a physical conservative, because some of our folks really know how to spend money, but they don't know how to save it. They don't know how to use it. You follow what I'm saying when I say that? We put people in office to handle our budgets, and we don't even ask if they have balanced their checkbook yet. We don't ask any of those real questions. We vote people in office because of popularity, brother, and that's it. Not because of their credentials, not because of their past experiences and of being able to accomplish something. We're putting people in because we like them. We like the way they talk. We like the way they sound. We like the way they smell. We like all of those. Suppose we were picking doctors to do a brain operation on us in that fashion. We'd be in trouble, okay?
Why don't you compare and contrast, in your opinion, the difference? I've heard you talk about the Democrat and the Republican Party. Could you give your views on differences between Democrats and Republicans today?
Both of them controlled by white men. I think black folks should have their own party. I think, but blacks shy away from that. Blacks are into integration, which moves into assimilation. And that's where we are today. Just like I think we should have our own party, like the pro-life groups have a party. All those, we should have a party, and we should have negotiators who negotiate with the Democrats, Republicans, whichever one looks like they're going to win, and bring them a laundry list of things that we need, and whichever one meets our needs, that's the one we ask the people to vote for. The way we vote right now is archaic, it's genocidal, it makes no rational sense whatsoever. All the years I've watched black folks vote in this town, I've yet to see black folks get anything. Just like, what is it that you keep voting for if you're not getting something for it? So that's the kind of problem I have. We're still fighting police brutality. Our school system still don't want to teach our children. Our prisons are overflowing with black folk. Our homes, our families are being destabilized. Juveniles are going to jail out of style. Television every night on the 6 o'clock news, you see them marching black folks off to court or to prison. Every time you pick up the newspaper, folks are dying in our neighborhood. What in the devil is your elected officials doing? What is it that you voted for? You don't even get them to say anything about crime. So what is it that people are voting for? I wish the devil they would tell me. Maybe they can change my mind.
In closing to this interview, Ted, given we have downsizings and control boards and financial problems and a bad economy right now, do you, in your opinion, think there's any hope for this city? What do you think is the future for Buffalo?
There's hope for this city. Sure, I think that people need to look at the fact that Washington D.C. had a control board at one point. New York City had a control board at one point. Yonkers had a control board at one point. They're still floating. What happens sometimes is that your elected officials get to be so controlled by other folk, your unions and others, that they can't really take care of business in the city. They can't do what is necessary because they're afraid they will not get reelected. You follow me? So then you bring in an outside force to do these things for you. That's what's happening right now. Don't be surprised if the control board doesn't come up with the commuter tax. Things that your elected officials should have came up with. When you start noticing that all your money is going to suburbia, that you're paying these fine, high salaries to people, the police, the fire, the teachers, and they're all taking their money to suburbia, and Cheektowaga and Depew and Amherst, all those places are becoming richer, and the inner core is becoming poorer because the money is going one way, and your elected officials don't have the freedom to make those decisions because they've already been. Jimmy Pitt's a prime example. A few years ago, nobody said nothing. The union, the police union, give him $10,000 a month. Now, whenever you see the police board giving a black man 10 grand to stay in office, your antennas should go up, but not in this town.